The harsh fluorescent lights of the museum's security office flickered, casting eerie shadows across Mara's face. She stared at her reflection in the small mirror propped against the wall, tracing the patterns of scale-like growths that marred her once smooth skin. The condition had started in her early teens, small, hardened patches that spread relentlessly across her body, leaving her an outcast. Now, at 32, Mara wore long sleeves and high collars even in the sweltering heat of summer, desperate to hide her affliction from the world. The night shift at the Metropolitan Museum of Art suited her. Alone in the cavernous halls, surrounded by beauty she could never hope to embody, Mara found a twisted sort of peace. She made her rounds, flashlight beam dancing across priceless artifacts and inscrutable modern installations. In the sculpture garden, her breath caught as it always did when she passed the work of Julian Voss. Julian, the blind sculptor whose visits had become the only bright spots in Mara's dreary existence. She remembered the first time she'd seen him, tapping his way through the exhibits with a confidence that belied his unseeing eyes. While other visitors gawked or whispered about the poor blind man, Mara had been transfixed. Here was someone who couldn't recoil at her appearance, someone who might see beyond the scales to the person beneath. It had taken weeks for Mara to work up the courage to speak to him. When she finally did, stumbling over her words as she described a new acquisition, Julian had smiled. That smile, warm, genuine, directed at her voice rather than her face, had been Mara's undoing. She began timing her breaks to coincide with his visits, offering detailed descriptions of exhibits, reveling in his rapt attention and insightful questions. "You have a gift, Mara," Julian had told her one night, his unseeing eyes crinkling at the corners. "The way you describe art, it's like you breathe life into stone." If only he knew. The change had come suddenly, violently. Mara had been reprimanding a group of rowdy teenagers, her temper flaring as one of them mocked her appearance. The boy's sneering face had contorted in terror, his skin taking on a grayish cast. Before Mara's horrified eyes, he had stiffened, flesh hardening to cold, unforgiving stone. In the days that followed, as missing person reports circulated and hushed whispers filled the museum halls, Mara had experimented. A stray cat in the alley behind her apartment, a pigeon in the park. Each creature turned to lifeless rock the moment it met her gaze. She was Medusa made flesh, a monster straight from the myths she'd learned to hate as a child. But Julian was different. He couldn't see her eyes, couldn't be turned to stone by her curse. And so Mara clung to him, to the promise of human connection without the risk of petrification. She poured her heart out to him, omitting only the truth of her newfound power. Julian listened, offering comfort and understanding. For the first time in her life, Mara felt seen. It wasn't enough. The obsession grew, feeding on years of loneliness and rejection. Mara began to imagine a life with Julian, a future where she wasn't alone. But she knew the truth. A blind man and a monster, hardly a recipe for happily ever after. Julian deserved more. He deserved art, the passion that drove him. And Mara could give him that. The first was a jogger, out for a late-night run in the park near the museum. Mara had followed him, pulse racing, palms sweating beneath her gloves. When he paused to retie his shoe, she struck. A cloth soaked in ether, a practiced swing of her heavy flashlight. She dragged him to her car, heart pounding so loudly she was sure someone would hear. In the basement of her crumbling apartment building, Mara had prepared a space. Soundproofed walls, sturdy chains, a chair bolted to the floor. The jogger came to slowly, confusion giving way to terror as he realized his predicament. Mara steeled herself, pushing away the revulsion that threatened to overwhelm her. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." The man's screams echoed in the small space as Mara approached, scalpel in hand. She forced herself to look into his eyes, to watch as the light faded from them, replaced by cold, lifeless stone. Only then did she begin her grisly work. Julian's hands roamed over the sculpture, fingers tracing the agonized expression frozen for eternity. "Remarkable," he breathed. "The detail, the emotion. Mara, where did you say you found this piece?" Mara swallowed hard, willing her voice to remain steady. A new artist. Very avant-garde. He's donating several pieces to the museum." Julian nodded, his unseeing eyes alight with excitement. "The pain is palpable. It's as if I can feel the subject's terror, their desperation, truly extraordinary work." Mara felt a rush of pride, quickly followed by a wave of nausea. She excused herself, barely making it to the restroom before emptying the meager contents of her stomach. As she rinsed her mouth, she caught sight of her reflection. The scales seemed to pulse in the harsh lighting, a physical manifestation of the darkness that had taken root in her soul. But she couldn't stop. Julian's praise, his genuine appreciation for the art she provided, became an addiction. Each new piece required a victim, carefully selected and meticulously prepared. Mara learned to work quickly, efficiently, honing her skills with each grisly creation. She told herself it was for Julian, for his art, but deep down she knew the truth. The power was intoxicating, the ability to shape life and death with nothing more than a look. As Julian's reputation grew, bolstered by the mysterious new acquisitions, so did the whispers. Museum staff and visitors alike commented on the lifelike quality of the sculptures, the raw emotion captured in stone. Mara overheard theories: advanced 3D printing, some new polymer that mimicked human flesh. If only they knew. Detective Michael Reeves stood before the latest sculpture, brow furrowed in concentration. Something about these pieces nagged at him, a similarity he couldn't quite place. The agonized expressions, the positioning of the bodies. It was all hauntingly familiar. "Reminds me of those missing persons cases," his partner Sarah Chen murmured beside him. "Remember that jogger last month? The way his face was all twisted up?" Reeves felt a chill run down his spine. "You're right. Pull up those case files. I want to compare photos." As the investigation intensified, Mara felt the walls closing in. She became paranoid, jumping at shadows, convinced that every glance held suspicion. Only with Julian did she feel safe, his unseeing eyes a balm to her fractured psyche. One night, as they sat in his studio, Julian's hands moved over her face with aching tenderness. "Mara," he whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words, once longed for, now filled her with dread. How could he love her, knowing what she truly was? The monster beneath the scales, the killer behind the art he so adored. "Julian, Mara's voice cracked. "There's something I need to tell you." But before she could continue, a pounding at the door shattered the moment. "Police! Open up!" Panic seized Mara. She looked wildly around the studio, gaze falling on the half-finished sculpture in the corner, her most recent victim, awaiting Julian's skilled hands to complete the transformation. Evidence of her crimes surrounded them, damning and irrefutable. "Mara!" Julian's voice was confused, concerned. "What's going on?" Time seemed to slow as Mara weighed her options. She could run, leave Julian to face the consequences alone. She could surrender, confess her sins, and face whatever punishment awaited. Or, "I'm sorry, Julian," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I love you too. I hope you can forgive me." Before he could respond, Mara cupped his face in her hands and removed his dark glasses. For the first time, Julian's unseeing eyes met hers directly. She watched, heartbreaking, as confusion gave way to realization, then to horror as the petrification took hold. The door burst open, Detective Reeves leading the charge. But it was too late. In the center of the studio stood two figures locked in an eternal embrace, the blind sculptor and his monstrous muse, immortalized in stone. As the officers swarmed the scene, Reeves approached the statues cautiously. Something caught his eye, a note clutched in the woman's petrified hand. With trembling fingers, he pried it loose, unfolding the paper to reveal a final, chilling message. "We are all monsters in the end. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." In the days that followed, as the full extent of Mara's crimes came to light, the art world grappled with an impossible question. What to do with the sculptures, now revealed as murder victims trapped in stone? Some argued for destruction, a final mercy for the souls imprisoned within. Others championed preservation, citing their artistic and historical value. In the end, a compromise was reached. The sculptures were sealed away in a secure wing of the museum, accessible only to researchers and law enforcement. But on quiet nights, when the halls are empty save for the night guards making their rounds, some swear they can hear the faintest whisper of screams echoing from behind those locked doors. A chorus of anguish from Mara's victims, and perhaps from Mara herself, all trapped for eternity in a prison of their own making.